The repair station on New Haven sat at the edge of nowhere, exactly where Jake Morrison wanted it. The small moon orbited a gas giant that nobody cared about, in a system that merchant ships only visited when they desperately needed fuel or repairs. Jake had bought the old mining station cheap 5 years ago, after leaving human space under circumstances he preferred not to discuss. Now he fixed ships, mining equipment, and whatever else broken things people brought to his door. He asked few questions, and expected the same courtesy in return. The station was small but well organized. Jake had converted the old ore processing center into his main workshop. Tools hung on magnetic strips along the walls, labeled and sorted by size. His welding equipment sat in one corner, his fabrication printer in another. The air always smelled like metal and machine oil. A scent Jake found more comforting than any perfume. He lived in 3 rooms attached to the workshop, cooked simple meals on a heating plate, and spent most of his waking hours with his hands inside broken machinery. It was late in the evening cycle when the knock came. Jake looked up from the mining drill he was repairing, wiping grease from his hands onto his already stained work pants. Visitors were rare after dark. He walked to the main airlock and checked the external camera. A figure stood outside, tall and completely wrapped in a dark cloak. Behind them, a heavy cargo sled held something large covered in torn fabric. Jake opened the airlock. The figure stepped inside, and even through the cloak, Jake could tell this person was big, easily 7 feet tall. Maybe more. When they moved with the controlled grace of a trained fighter. Jake had learned to recognize dangerous people, and this visitor definitely qualified. "I need repair work," the figure said. The voice was deep, with an accent Jake didn't recognize. "Can you do it without questions?" "Can you do it without questions? That's my specialty," Jake replied. The figure gestured to the cargo sled. "Battle armor. Damaged in combat. Local craftsmen say it cannot be repaired." Jake raised an eyebrow. Battle armor meant military, and military meant complications. But he also needed the money, and turning away customers wasn't good business. "Let me see it." They hauled the cargo sled into the workshop. When the figure pulled back the covering, Jake let out a low whistle. The armor was unlike anything he had seen before. It looked organic and mechanical at the same time, with scales that seemed to flow into each other like dragon skin. The metal had a deep crimson color that shifted to gold in certain light. But the damage was severe. A massive crack ran down the chest plate. The left shoulder assembly was completely shattered, and scorch marks covered most of the surface. "This is beautiful work," Jake said, running his hand along the undamaged sections. The metal was warm to the touch, almost alive. "What species made this? Can you fix it?" the figure asked, ignoring his question. Jake examined the damage more closely. The crack went deep, but hadn't compromised the internal structure completely. The shoulder would need complete reconstruction. The scorch marks were mostly surface damage. "I can fix it," he said. "But I'll need to know what materials this is made from. I've never seen this alloy before." "Do what you can with what you have," the figure said. "I will return in 3 days." "Payment?" Jake asked. The figure placed a credit chip on his workbench. Jake scanned it, and his eyebrows went up. It was enough money to cover 6 months of station operating costs. "Half now, half when you return," he said. The figure nodded and left without another word. Jake stood alone in his workshop, staring at the damaged armor. He should have asked more questions. He should have been more careful. But his hands were already itching to solve the puzzle in front of him. He started with analysis. His scanner couldn't identify the primary metal, which meant it was something rare or alien. The internal structure used energy channels unlike any human design. The armor seemed built to conduct and redirect power, possibly from weapons or maybe from the wearer themselves. Jake had heard stories about alien species who could generate energy naturally, but he'd never worked with their equipment before. For the first night, he just studied. He took measurements, made drawings, tested small sections with different tools. The metal responded to heat, but only at very high temperatures. It could be shaped, but only with precise pressure. Standard welding wouldn't work. He would need to use his plasma forge, and even then, he'd need to modify his approach. The second day, Jake started the real work. He fabricated replacement parts for the shoulder assembly, using a combination of the original metal fragments and titanium alloy from his stores. Pure titanium wouldn't match, but he could create a composite that shared similar properties. He worked through the day and into the night, stopping only to eat protein bars and drink coffee. The crack in the chest plate was the biggest challenge. It had split along what looked like a natural seam in the armor's construction. Jake realized this wasn't just damage, it was a structural weakness in the original design. Whoever made this armor had created something beautiful, but had overlooked basic engineering principles. The energy channels focused too much power through too narrow a path. Under extreme stress, the metal had simply given up. Jake made a decision that would later change everything. He didn't just repair the crack. He redesigned the energy distribution system. Using principles from human spacecraft engineering, he created secondary channels that would spread the load more evenly. He reinforced the repair with a lattice structure that was actually stronger than the original solid plate. When he was done, the chest plate wouldn't just hold together, it would handle more stress than the armor's creators had ever intended. The third day was for details. He polished the repairs until they blended with the original metal. He tested every joint and connection. He calibrated the energy channels using his power flow analyzer. The armor wouldn't look exactly as it had before, but it would function better, much better. Jake worked through the final night without sleeping. He was possessed by the kind of focus that only came when he was solving a really interesting problem. This wasn't just repair work anymore. This was creation. He was taking something broken and making it whole again, making it better than it had been. When the figure returned exactly 3 days later, Jake was still in his workshop, surrounded by tools and empty coffee cups. He looked terrible, with dark circles under his eyes and 3 days of stubble on his face. But the armor gleamed on his workbench, fully restored. The figure approached slowly, then stopped. Even through the cloak, Jake could sense shock. Long minutes passed in silence. "You actually repaired it," the figure finally said. "I did better than that," Jake replied. He was too tired to be modest. "I fixed the design flaw that caused the worst damage. The energy distribution system was flawed. I rebuilt it." Quote, "Unhardy." Quote, "Far. This armor can handle about 40% more stress now before showing any strain. I also reinforced the shoulder assembly with a shock absorption system. And I improved the thermal regulation throughout." The figure reached out and touched the armor with what looked like reverence. "You modified it?" "I improved it," Jake corrected. "That's what I do. I don't just fix things. I make them work better." The figure carefully loaded the armor back onto the cargo sled, moving with extreme care. They transferred the second half of the payment, then paused at the airlock door. "What is your name, human?" "Jake Morrison. And you're welcome." The figure left without giving their own name. Jake watched them go, then stumbled to his small quarters and collapsed onto his bed. He slept for 16 hours straight. He didn't know that the armor he'd repaired belonged to Queen Vexa, supreme commander of the Draknari Empire's military forces. He didn't know that the armor was considered a sacred artifact, passed down through royal bloodlines for generations. He didn't know that by modifying it without permission, he had violated laws that could carry a death sentence. He didn't know that his life was about to become very complicated. 3 days after the figure left, Jake was working on a broken hydraulic press when his station's proximity alarms went off. He checked his screens and felt his stomach drop. 6 ships were approaching, military grade by their profiles. They moved in formation, with the precision of trained combat pilots. Jake ran through his options. Running was pointless. The station had no weapons. Hiding was impossible. He walked to the main airlock and waited. The ships docked without requesting permission. Armed soldiers poured into his station, wearing armor similar to what he'd repaired but less ornate. They were Draknari, he realized now. The dragon warriors he'd heard about in spacer stories. Each one stood nearly 7 feet tall, with scales visible on their exposed skin and eyes that seemed to glow with inner fire. They searched his station efficiently, scanning everything, checking every corner. Their leader, a male, with dark green scales visible on his neck, approached Jake. "You are Jake Morrison?" "That's me. You are detained for crimes against the Draknari Empire, unauthorized modification of royal property, violation of sacred artifacts, possible espionage." "I'm a what now?" Jake asked. "You will explain that to the High Council," the soldier said. "Bring him." They put restraints on his wrists. Not roughly, but firmly. Jake looked around his workshop, at his tools, at the life he'd built here. He had a feeling he wouldn't be seeing this place again for a long time. As they led him to their ship, Jake thought about the armor, about the satisfaction he'd felt making it work better. He'd done good work. Really good work. If they were going to punish him for that, then at least he'd go down knowing he'd done his job right. The ship accelerated away from New Haven, carrying Jake toward a confrontation he couldn't imagine and a destiny he never expected. His quiet life was over. Something else was beginning. The journey to the Draknari fortress world took 5 days. Jake spent most of that time in a small but comfortable cell on the military ship. They fed him decent food and didn't mistreat him, but he was definitely a prisoner. The guards rotated in shifts, always watching but rarely speaking. When Jake tried to ask questions, they simply stared at him with those glowing eyes until he gave up. He used the time to think. The armor he'd repaired must have been important. More important than he'd realized. Royal property, the soldier had said. That meant nobility, maybe even their ruling family. Jake had worked on a lot of equipment over the years, but he'd never accidentally committed treason against an interstellar empire before. That was a new personal record. The ship finally dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and Jake got his first look at the Draknari home system. The fortress world of Drakna Prime dominated the view, a massive planet with 3 moons. Even from space, Jake could see the enormous structures on the surface, cities that glowed like jewels, defensive platforms that bristled with weapons, shipyards where vessels larger than his entire station were being constructed. They landed at a military complex that covered an area the size of a small continent. The architecture was impressive. All soaring towers and platforms that seemed to defy gravity. Everything was built on a scale that made humans look tiny. The Draknari liked their spaces big. Jake was escorted into a holding facility deep inside the main fortress. His cell here was smaller than the one on the ship, just a bench and a sanitation unit. The walls were some kind of energy field that hummed constantly. He sat on the bench and waited. Hours passed. Nobody came. Finally, the energy field dropped, and 4 guards entered. "You will come with us," their leader said. They led him through corridors that seemed to go on forever. Draknari soldiers and officials passed by, most of them giving Jake curious looks. Humans were rare in this part of space, and a human prisoner was probably unusual enough to attract attention. Jake tried to memorize the route, but after the 15th turn, he gave up. They entered a massive chamber with a ceiling so high Jake couldn't see the top. At the far end sat a raised platform with several throne-like chairs. The guards positioned Jake in the center of the room and stepped back. More Draknari entered. These ones wearing elaborate robes marked with symbols Jake didn't recognize. Officials. Probably. Maybe judges. They took positions around the room, speaking to each other in low voices. Jake stood and waited, trying not to show how nervous he felt. Then she entered, and Jake understood immediately who had brought him the armor. Queen Vexa was impossible to miss. She stood even taller than the soldiers, nearly 8 feet, with scales that shifted between crimson and gold as she moved. Her eyes burned with an intensity that made Jake want to step back, but he held his ground. She wore the armor he'd repaired, and even from across the chamber, he could see it gleaming perfectly. She walked with absolute confidence, and every Dragnari in the room stood straighter when she passed. She reached the center of the room and stopped directly in front of Jake. For a long moment, she simply stared at him. Jake stared back, refusing to look away. He'd learned long ago that showing fear to predators only made things worse. Then Vexa's voice filled the chamber, loud enough to make the walls vibrate. "Who gave you permission to touch my armor?" The roar was physical. A wave of sound that Jake felt in his chest. He understood now why they called her the Dragon Queen. This wasn't just a title. This was something primal, something ancient and dangerous. But Jake had faced angry customers before, and he'd learned that the best response to aggression was calm professionalism. "Nobody gave me permission," he said, keeping his voice level. "A customer brought me damaged equipment and paid me to fix it. I did my job." "Your job?" Vexa's eyes narrowed. "You modified sacred armor without authorization. You altered a royal artifact that has been passed through my bloodline for 30 generations. You, a human, presumed to improve upon the work of the greatest craftsman in Dragnari history." "I didn't presume anything," Jake replied. "I analyzed the damage, identified the problems, and solved them. That's what mechanics do. If your greatest craftsman had done the job right the first time, it wouldn't have needed fixing." The chamber went completely silent. Several of the robed officials made choking sounds. The guards' hands moved toward their weapons. Vexa herself seemed frozen, as if nobody had ever spoken to her that way before. Jake realized he might have pushed too far. "Look," he said, "I didn't know it was royal property. You came to my station in disguise, paid me to do a job, and I did it. If that breaks your laws, then I'm sorry. But I'm not sorry for doing good work." "Good work?" Vexa moved closer. "You claim your modifications are improvements?" "I don't claim anything," Jake said. "The results speak for themselves. Your armor was damaged because of a design flaw in the energy distribution system. Too much power through too narrow channels. I fixed that flaw. I also added shock absorption to the shoulder assembly and improved thermal regulation throughout. You want to argue with me about it? Fine. But first, tell me I'm wrong." Vexa stared at him for another long moment. Then she turned to address the assembled officials. "Council members, witness what I show you now." She activated the armor's systems. Energy flowed through the channels Jake had modified, visible as glowing lines beneath the scales. The distribution was even, smooth, with no hot spots or weak points. She demonstrated the shoulder assembly, moving it through ranges of motion that should have been impossible for something that had been completely shattered days before. She activated the thermal systems, and the armor regulated temperature perfectly even under stress. "The human speaks truth," Vexa said. "Every modification he made improves the armor's function. The energy distribution is more efficient. The structural integrity is stronger. The thermal performance is superior." She paused. "My armor has never functioned this well, not even when it was first forged." The officials began talking among themselves, their voices rising. Jake caught fragments of the conversation. Some seemed impressed, others seemed angry. A few seemed scared, though Jake couldn't figure out why improvements to armor would frighten anyone. An elderly Dragnari with white scales stepped forward. He wore more elaborate robes than the others, marked with golden symbols. "Queen Vexa, the law is clear. Unauthorized modification of royal artifacts carries severe penalties. The human's skill is undeniable, but that does not excuse the violation." "I agree the law was violated," Vexa said, "but I propose an alternative to standard punishment." The elderly official raised his hand. "The High Council will hear your proposal." Vexa turned back to Jake. "In ancient times, when a warrior found a craftsman of exceptional skill, they could claim that craftsman as a personal retainer. The practice has not been used in centuries, but the law still exists. I invoke that right now. I claim Jake Morrison as my personal mechanic, bound to my service, and under my direct protection. The chamber erupted into chaos. Officials shouted at each other. Guards looked confused. Jake stood in the middle of it all, trying to understand what had just happened. He'd gone from prisoner to what? Employee? Property? He wasn't sure. The elderly official raised both hands, calling for silence. Queen Vexa. This is highly irregular. The human is not Draknari. He has no training in our ways. He does not understand our culture or customs. He understands machinery, Vexa replied. He understands how to make broken things work again. That is what matters to me. Another official, younger with bright blue scales, spoke up. This sets a dangerous precedent. If we allow humans to modify our technology without consequence, what stops others from doing the same? The consequence is that their work must meet the highest standards, Vexa said. This human's work exceeds those standards. If others can match his skill, then perhaps we should learn from them, instead of punishing them. The debate continued for over an hour. Jake listened, trying to follow the arguments. Some officials supported Vexa's proposal. Others opposed it strongly. A few seemed interested in Jake's techniques and asked technical questions that he answered honestly. The more he spoke, the more divided the council became. Finally, the elderly official called for order again. The High Council will vote. All in favor of Queen Vexa's proposal to claim the human as personal retainer? Hands rose slowly around the chamber. Jake counted. It looked close, too close to call. All opposed? More hands rose. Jake's stomach sank. The numbers looked even. The elderly official closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. In matters where the council is divided, tradition grants the deciding vote to the most senior member present. As High Chancellor, I cast my vote in favor of Queen Vexa's proposal. Jake Morrison is hereby bound to her service under ancient law. This matter is concluded. The chamber emptied quickly after that, officials leaving while still arguing among themselves. The guards removed Jake's restraints. Vexa approached him again. This time, without the aggressive posture. You are free to move within designated areas, she said. You will be assigned quarters near my personal squadron's facilities. Your duties will be explained tomorrow. What if I refuse? Jake asked. Vexa tilted her head. Then you return to prison and face trial for your original violations. The penalties would be severe. So I'm not actually free. You are free to work or free to face justice, Vexa said. Jake thought about it. He'd lost his station either way. Going back to human space wasn't really an option, given why he'd left in the first place. And if he was honest, the work here would probably be interesting. More interesting than fixing mining drills. Fine, he said. I'll work for you. But I have conditions. No. Several guards reached for their weapons, but Vexa held up her hand. You are in no position to make demands. I'm in exactly the position to make demands, Jake replied. You need me, or you wouldn't have gone through all this trouble. So here's what I need. Access to proper tools and materials. Freedom to work my own way without someone watching over my shoulder constantly. And respect. I don't care about titles or rank. Treat me like a skilled professional, and I'll do the same for you. Vexa studied him for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. It was a predator's smile, showing teeth designed for tearing. But there was something like approval in it. You are either very brave or very foolish. Human. I'm a mechanic, Jake said. I deal with reality, not politics. Machinery doesn't care about your feelings. It either works or it doesn't. I figure people should operate the same way. Your conditions are acceptable, Vexa said. Do not make me regret this decision. Do good work, get respect, Jake replied. That's how it should be. I won't let you down. Vexa turned and left, her armor catching the light as she walked. Jake stood alone in the massive chamber, surrounded by guards who looked at him like he was something they'd never seen before. He probably was. A human mechanic, bound to serve a dragon queen, in a culture he didn't understand. He definitely had easier jobs. But as a guard led him toward his new quarters, Jake felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not even worry, just curiosity about what came next, and eagerness to get his hands on new machinery. If he was going to be stuck here, he might as well make the most of it. And maybe teach these dragon warriors a thing or two about human engineering along the way. Jake's quarters were better than he expected. A single room about 20 feet square, with a sleeping platform, a desk, and a sanitation unit. A large window looked out over the military complex, showing the constant movement of ships and personnel. It wasn't home, but it would do. He'd barely finished examining the space when a young Draknari soldier appeared at his door. I am Lieutenant Caro. I will show you the workshop facilities and explain your duties. Jake followed him through the complex. The hallways were massive, built for beings much larger than humans. Jake felt like a child walking through an adult's house. They passed training halls where Dragnari warriors practiced combat, armories filled with weapons Jake didn't recognize, and command centers where tactical displays showed fleet movements across multiple systems. The workshop Lieutenant Caro showed him was incredible. It covered an area larger than Jake's entire repair station had been. Equipment lined the walls. Some of it familiar, most of it alien. There were fabrication systems that could create parts at the molecular level, testing chambers that could simulate combat conditions, and diagnostic tools that made Jake's old scanner look like a toy. This is where Queen Vexa's personal squadron maintains their equipment, Caro explained. You will work here. The other mechanics will show you our procedures. The other mechanics turned out to be 3 Draknari craftsmen who looked at Jake the way someone might look at an insect that had crawled onto their workbench. The eldest, a scarred veteran named Master Reth, spoke first. So you are the human who thinks he can improve Draknari craftsmanship. His tone made it clear what he thought of that idea. I'm the human who did improve it, Jake replied. I've got Queen Vexa's armor to prove it. One repair does not make you a master craftsman, Reth said. You will observe and learn. Touch nothing without permission. Jake had dealt with territorial co-workers before. He nodded politely and spent the first day watching. He observed how they worked, what tools they used, what techniques they preferred. The Draknari approach was meticulous and traditional. Every repair followed precise procedures passed down through generations. The work was good, very good, but it was also rigid. When Jake suggested a faster method for calibrating power flow, Reth dismissed the idea without even considering it. By the second day, Jake was bored. Watching was fine, but he needed to work with his hands. When a junior pilot brought in damaged flight controls, Jake saw his opportunity. Wine, OT. Wine, the young Draknari, barely old enough to be in the military by human standards, looked frustrated. Master Reith says it will take 5 days to repair, the pilot said. But I am scheduled for combat drills in 3 days. Reth shrugged. Then you will miss your drills. Proper repair cannot be rushed. Oh. After the pilot left, Jake examined the damaged controls. The problem was actually simple. A feedback loop in the neural interface had burned out several connection points. Reth's 5-day estimate involved replacing the entire interface module, which required removing half the cockpit systems. But Jake could see another way. He waited until Reth and the others left for their evening meal. Then he got to work. Using tools from his own kit that he'd been allowed to keep, Jake bypassed the damaged sections and rerouted the neural pathways through secondary channels. It took him 4 hours of careful work. But when he finished, the controls functioned perfectly. He left them on the workbench with a simple note. The next morning, Reth's roar echoed through the workshop. Who touched the flight controls? Who disregarded my repair schedule? Jake raised his hand calmly. I did. The pilot needs them in 3 days. Now he has them. Reth stormed over, his scales flushing darker with anger. You had no authority. You do not follow proper procedures. You could have caused a malfunction that would kill the pilot. Test them yourself, Jake said. If they don't work perfectly, you can throw me out of here. Reth grabbed the controls and connected them to a diagnostic system. His expression shifted from anger to confusion as he read the results. This is impossible. You repaired a 5-day job in 4 hours? I solved the actual problem instead of following a procedure designed for different problems, Jake explained. Your method works fine, but it's like rebuilding an entire engine when you just need to replace a spark plug. The junior pilot returned that afternoon, shocked to find his controls ready. He tested them in a simulator while Jake watched. The pilot's face lit up with joy as he moved through increasingly complex maneuvers. These are perfect, he said. Better than before they were damaged. The response time is faster, probably because I cleaned out some accumulated errors in the system while I was in there, Jake said. Should handle a bit smoother now. After the pilot left, Reth approached Jake again. This time his expression was more thoughtful than angry. Your method is unorthodox, but the results are undeniable. Perhaps there is value in human techniques after all. There's value in any technique that works, Jake replied. The trick is knowing when to use which approach. Word spread quickly through the squadron. By the end of the week, pilots and warriors were bringing their equipment directly to Jake, asking him to look at problems that the traditional mechanics had declared minor or impossible to fix. Jake worked on everything. A targeting system that drifted slightly off caliber. Armor that overheated during extended combat. A weapon that jammed after rapid fire. Each problem was a puzzle, and Jake loved puzzles. One evening, a female warrior named Captain Sarah brought him something different. She carried her armor awkwardly, favoring her right side. I injured my shoulder in combat 2 years ago, she explained. The medical staff healed it, but it never regained full strength. My armor no longer fits properly. It causes pain during extended missions. Jake examined the armor and then, carefully, asked if he could check her shoulder. Sarah allowed it, though she looked uncomfortable. Jake could feel the scar tissue beneath her scales, the way the muscles had healed in a slightly different position. The armor wasn't the problem. The armor was just responding to a physical change in her body. I can't fix your injury, Jake said. But I can modify your armor to accommodate it. Redistribute the weight, adjust the support systems, maybe add some additional padding in specific areas. It won't be a perfect solution, but it should reduce the pain significantly. Sarah looked surprised. The traditional craftsman said modification was impossible. The armor must fit the warrior, not the other way around. That's nice philosophy, Jake said. But you live with real pain. Philosophy doesn't help with that. Give me 2 days. Jake worked on Sarah's armor with special care. He analyzed her movement patterns, identified exactly where the stress points were, and redesigned those sections. He added flexible support structures that would adjust to her body's new shape. He even modified the internal temperature system to provide gentle heat therapy to her shoulder during use. When Sarah tried on the modified armor, she moved through a full combat sequence. Then she stopped and turned to Jake with something like wonder in her eyes. I feel no pain. None at all. How did you do this? I listened to the real problem instead of following rules that didn't apply, Jake said. You needed custom work, not standard procedures. Sarah touched her shoulder, moving it in ways she clearly hadn't been able to do in years. You have given me back something I thought I had lost. I am in your debt. Human. Just Jake, he replied. And you don't owe me anything. This is my job. But in Draknari culture, debts mattered. Sarah began bringing other warriors to Jake, telling them about his work. The workshop became busier. Jake found himself working 12 and 14-hour days, but he didn't mind. This was the most interesting work he'd done in years. Master Reth approached him one evening after most of the others had left. "You work differently than any craftsman I have known. We could partner armaments," the old Draknari said. "You show no respect for tradition, yet your results cannot be argued with." "I respect tradition when tradition works," Jake replied. "But I respect results more. What matters is whether the equipment functions when someone's life depends on it." Reth nodded slowly. "Perhaps that is wisdom. I have been thinking about your methods. Show me this technique you used for the flight controls. I wish to understand it." Jake spent the next hour explaining his approach, showing Reth how to identify problems more quickly, how to think about repairs in terms of actual function rather than just procedure. Reth listened carefully, asking intelligent questions. By the end, the old craftsman was nodding. "I have been doing this work for 40 years, Reth said. "I thought I knew everything there was to know. You have shown me that there is always more to learn. This is humbling, but also exciting." "That's how I feel every day," Jake said. "Every new problem is a chance to learn something." The breakthrough came 3 weeks after Jake had started working in the squadron. Queen Vexa herself appeared in the workshop, accompanied by several senior officers. Everyone immediately stood at attention. Jake kept working on the power coupling he was calibrating, finishing the adjustment before looking up. "The human does not stand for his queen," one of the officers said disapprovingly. The human was finishing a calibration that would have been ruined if interrupted. Vexa's expression was unreadable. "I have been receiving reports about your work. My pilots speak highly of you. My warriors trust you with their equipment. This is unusual for one so new to our culture." "I just fix things," Jake said. "People tend to appreciate that." "I wish you to examine something," Vexa said. She gestured, and 2 soldiers brought in a large device that Jake didn't recognize. "This is a power core from one of our main battle cruisers. It has been malfunctioning for 6 months. 3 different teams of expert craftsmen have attempted repairs. All have failed. The ship sits idle because we cannot solve this problem." Jake walked around the power core, studying it from all angles. It was massive, probably weighing several tons. The casing was scored with energy burns. When he placed his hand on it, he could feel residual heat. "What are the symptoms?" he asked. "Power output fluctuates randomly," Vexa explained. "Sometimes it operates at full capacity. Sometimes it drops to 20%. There is no pattern. The fluctuations can last seconds or hours." Jake requested diagnostic equipment and spent an hour scanning the core from every angle. The other craftsmen watched, some curious, some skeptical. Finally, Jake stood up and smiled. "I know what's wrong," he said. "And your expert teams missed it because they were looking too hard at complex problems. The issue is actually simple." "Explain," Vexa commanded. Jake pointed to a section of the casing. "There's a microfracture here, barely visible. It opens and closes based on thermal expansion. When it's open, it creates a tiny energy leak. Not enough to show up on most scans, but enough to destabilize the entire core's output. Your experts were testing the internal systems, which all work fine. Nobody checked the casing for damage, because it's supposed to be nearly indestructible." Master Reth stepped forward, examining the area Jake indicated. He pulled out a precision scanner and went silent as he read the results. "The human is correct. There is a fracture. I cannot believe we missed this." "You missed it because you trusted your assumptions," Jake said. "The casing is tough, so you assumed it was undamaged. I don't know enough about your technology to have those assumptions, so I checked everything." "Can you repair it?" Vexa asked. "Easily," Jake replied. "I'll need Master Reth's help, because he knows the metallurgy better than I do. But yes, I can fix this. Have your ship ready to test in 2 days." Jake and Reth worked together on the power core, combining human problem-solving with Dragnari craftsmanship. They sealed the fracture, then added reinforcement to prevent future damage. When they finished, they tested the core for 6 hours straight. The power output remained perfectly stable. The battlecruiser was operational within a week. Vexa summoned Jake to her private office. A space filled with weapons, battle honors, and holographic tactical displays. "You have proven your value," she said without preamble. "My warriors respect you. My craftsmen learn from you. You have made my squadron more effective than it has been in years. I chose well when I claimed you." "I'm just doing my job," Jake said. "You do far more than your job requires," Vexa replied. "You care about the warriors who depend on your work. That is rare, even among our own people. I would know your story, Jake Morrison. Why were you alone on that station? What brought you to that place?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. "I made mistakes in my past. Bad ones. I hurt people I cared about. So I left. Found a place where I couldn't hurt anyone else. Fixed things, instead of people. It seemed safer. And now?" Vexa asked. "Now I'm here, doing the same thing on a bigger scale," Jake said. "I still fix things. But maybe I'm learning that fixing things for people who need them isn't such a bad way to live." Vexa nodded slowly. "You are wiser than you pretend to be. Continue your work. And know that you have earned your place here." As Jake left her office, he realized something had changed. He'd come here as a prisoner, expecting punishment. Instead, he'd found purpose. The Dragnari might be dragons, powerful and ancient, but they needed the same thing everyone needed: their equipment, to work, when their lives depended on it. Jake could do that. He was good at it. And for the first time in years, he felt like he belonged somewhere. 3 months passed quickly. Jake settled into a routine that felt almost normal. If normal included working for dragon warriors in an alien military complex. He woke early, spent his mornings in the workshop, took his meals in the squadron's common area, and often worked late into the evening. The Dragnari warriors no longer treated him as an outsider. They brought him their problems, listened to his advice, and even invited him to observe their training sessions. He learned their language slowly, picking up words and phrases. He learned their customs, like the importance of eye contact when making promises, and the ritual of sharing first meal with those you trusted. He even learned to appreciate their food, though he still thought human coffee was vastly superior to anything the Dragnari drank. Captain Sarah became something close to a friend. She often stopped by the workshop just to talk, telling Jake about Dragnari history and culture. In return, Jake told her about Earth, about human diversity, about the thousands of different ways humans had learned to survive and thrive across one planet. Sarah found the stories fascinating. "Your people adapt to everything," she said one evening. "Deserts, frozen lands, mountains, oceans. You change yourselves to fit the environment." "We didn't have much choice," Jake replied. "Humans aren't particularly strong or fast. We don't have natural armor or claws. We survived by being stubborn and creative." "That explains much about you," Sarah said with what Jake had learned was her version of a smile. "You are very stubborn and very creative." Master Reth had also become an ally. The old craftsman spent hours with Jake, teaching him about Dragnari metallurgy and energy systems. In return, Jake shared human engineering principles and problem-solving techniques. They created a hybrid approach that combined the best of both methods. "I am too old to change completely," Reth admitted one day. "But my apprentices will learn your ways. They will create something new, something better than either of our traditions alone." Queen Vexa visited the workshop regularly, always with new challenges. A prototype weapon that wouldn't cycle properly, a shield generator that consumed too much power, a communication system that had intermittent failures. Jake tackled each problem with enthusiasm, and his solutions often led to improvements across the entire fleet. One morning, Vexa arrived with her senior officers, her expression grim. "We have a situation," she announced. "The Hive Coalition has begun a major offensive. Multiple systems are under attack. Intelligence suggests they are pushing toward the outer territories. Specifically, the supply routes that connect our forward bases." Jake had heard about the Hive Coalition, insectoid species that thought as collectives, building biomechanical ships that could reproduce and adapt. They were one of the few forces in the galaxy that seriously threatened the Draknari Empire. "What does this mean for us?" Lieutenant Caro asked. "It means this squadron will be deployed within 48 hours, Vexa said. "We will defend the supply route at the Keswick system. This will be a major engagement. All equipment must be at peak efficiency." The workshop became a controlled chaos of activity. Every warrior's armor was inspected and optimized. Every weapon was tested and calibrated. Every ship system was checked and double-checked. Jake worked alongside the Draknari craftsmen, moving from task to task, solving problems as they arose. During a brief rest period, Jake found himself studying the tactical displays in the command center. The Hive forces were massive, much larger than the defending Draknari fleet. He looked at the ship's specifications, analyzing their capabilities. Something caught his attention. He found Lieutenant Caro reviewing supply manifests. "Can I see the technical specifications for our ship's defensive systems?" Caro looked surprised but accessed the files. Jake studied them carefully, his expression growing increasingly concerned. "This is a problem," he finally said. "What is a problem?" Caro asked. "Your power distribution system. It's efficient under normal conditions. But it has a vulnerability. See here?" Jake pointed to the display. "The main shield generators and the primary weapons share power relays. If those relays are hit with a strong electromagnetic pulse, both systems fail simultaneously. Our shields protect against electromagnetic attacks," Caro said. "They protect against standard EMP weapons," Jake agreed. "But the Hive uses bioelectric systems. From what I'm reading in these intelligence reports, their EMP attacks are different. They pulse at varying frequencies, searching for resonance points. If they find the right frequency, they can overload your relays through the shields themselves." Caro's scales paled slightly. If both shields and weapons fail during combat, a ship is helpless. "Exactly," Jake said. "And from the tactical data, the Hive has been using this tactic successfully against other species' ships. They just haven't faced Draknari forces directly before now. I must inform Queen Vexa immediately." They found Vexa in the planning chamber, reviewing battle strategies with her commanders. When Caro explained the problem, the room went silent. "How certain are you of this analysis?" Vexa asked Jake. "I'd need to run tests to be completely sure," Jake said. "But the physics are sound. Your power distribution system is brilliant under normal conditions, but nobody designed it to handle bioelectric interference. Why would they? The Hive wasn't a major threat when these ships were designed. Can the vulnerability be fixed?" one of the commanders asked. Jake thought about it. "Yes, but not easily. I'd need to modify the power relay systems to include frequency dampeners and create backup pathways for critical systems. It's not a complete redesign, but it's extensive work. On one ship, I could do it in maybe 20 hours. For the entire squadron, we have 48 hours, Vexa said, and 15 ships in this squadron. The math was brutal. Even working non-stop, Jake couldn't modify 15 ships alone. He needed help, and he needed people who could understand and implement his designs quickly. "I'll need every craftsman you have," Jake said. "And I'll need them to follow my instructions exactly, even if what I tell them sounds wrong, based on traditional methods." Master Reth stepped forward. "I will vouch for him. My craftsman will do as he instructs." Vexa made her decision in seconds. "Do it. Every available craftsman is now under Jake Morrison's authority. Whatever resources you need, you will have them. But understand this, human. If your modifications fail, if they make our ships weaker instead of stronger, many warriors will die. Then I better not make any mistakes, Jake replied. The next 48 hours were the most intense of Jake's life. He divided the craftsmen into teams, sending each team to a different ship with detailed instructions. He created step-by-step procedures, simplifying his designs so they could be implemented quickly. He moved from ship to ship, checking work, correcting mistakes, answering questions. He barely slept. He survived on coffee that Captain Sierra brought him after learning about the human stimulant. He worked until his hands cramped and his eyes burned, then kept working anyway. The Draknari craftsman worked just as hard, following his lead without complaint. Master Reth became his second in command, understanding Jake's designs well enough to supervise multiple teams simultaneously. Captain Sierra coordinated logistics, ensuring parts and tools reached the right ships at the right time. Even warriors who weren't on duty volunteered to help, carrying equipment, running messages, doing whatever was needed. With 12 hours remaining, they'd completed modifications on 11 ships, 4 ships to go, and Jake could feel exhaustion pulling at him. He was making mistakes, small ones that Reth caught before they became problems. His hands shook as he worked. "You must rest," Reth said. "You are no good to anyone if you collapse." "I'm fine," Jake insisted, then nearly dropped the tool he was holding. Vexa appeared beside him, seemingly from nowhere. She took the tool from his hand. "Master Reth is correct. You will rest for 4 hours. That is an order. But the work will be completed by others using the procedures you created," Vexa said firmly. "You have trained us well. We can finish this. But you must rest, or you will make an error that costs lives." Jake wanted to argue, but he was too tired. He let Sierra guide him to a rest chamber on one of the ships. He collapsed onto a bunk and was asleep before Sierra left the room. 4 hours later, he woke to find the modifications complete. All 15 ships had been upgraded. The craftsman had followed his procedures perfectly, even improvising solutions to problems Jake hadn't anticipated. He felt a surge of pride. They'd learned not just his techniques but his approach, his way of thinking about problems. The squadron launched 6 hours later. Jake stood in the hangar, watching the ships lift off, one by one. He'd done everything he could. Now it was up to the warriors to use what he'd given them. Captain Sarah approached, her armor gleaming. "You are not coming with us." "I'm a mechanic, not a warrior," Jake said. "I'd just be in the way." "You could observe from one of the command ships," Sarah suggested. "Many would feel better knowing you are available, if problems arise." Jake thought about it. The smart move was to stay here. Safe. But these warriors trusted him with their lives every time they used equipment he'd worked on. The least he could do was be there if they needed him. "Which ship is Queen Vexa commanding?" he asked. "The Blade of Dawn, her personal flagship." "Then I guess that's where I need to be." Sierra's expression showed approval. "I will inform her. Prepare yourself. Jake Morrison. You are about to see Dragnari warriors in true combat." 1. Jake gathered his tools and some spare parts, stuffing everything into a durable bag. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew one thing for certain. If his modifications failed, if his designs had flaws he hadn't anticipated, warriors would die. That knowledge sat heavy in his stomach as he boarded the shuttle to the flagship. The Blade of Dawn was impressive. A warship 3 times the size of any vessel Jake had worked on. The corridors hummed with barely contained power. Warriors moved with purpose, checking weapons and armor, preparing for battle. Jake felt very small and very human among them. A young officer escorted him to the engineering bay, a space filled with monitoring systems and repair equipment. "You will stay here during combat," the officer explained. "If problems arise, you will coordinate with damage control teams." Queen Vexa appeared as the officer left. She wore her armor. The armor Jake had first repaired months ago. It still gleamed perfectly. "You chose to come," she said. "Seemed like the right thing to do," Jake replied. "Besides, if something goes wrong with my modifications, I'd rather be here to fix it than sitting safe somewhere wondering what happened." "Nothing will go wrong," Vexa said with absolute confidence. "You have done more in 2 days than seemed possible. My warriors trust you completely. I trust you completely. Let's hope that trust is justified," Jake said. Vexa placed one large hand on his shoulder, a gesture he'd learned meant respect among the Dragnari. "Win or lose, you have already proven your worth. Remember that." She left to take her position on the command deck. Jake settled into the engineering bay, surrounded by screens showing every system on every ship in the squadron. He watched the tactical display as the fleet entered faster than light travel, heading toward the Keswick system and whatever waited there. His modifications would be tested soon. And so would he. The Blade of Dawn dropped out of faster than light travel at the edge of the Keswick system, and Jake got his first real look at a space battle. The tactical displays showed dozens of Hive ships already engaged with Dragnari defensive forces. The Hive vessels looked organic, like massive insects built from chitin and metal. They moved in swarms, coordinating their attacks with perfect synchronization. "All ships, combat formation." Vexa's voice came through the communication system, calm and commanding. "Stay tight. Watch for EMP bursts. Execute strategy Alpha on my mark." Jake watched the squadron move into position. The 15 ships formed a defensive sphere, protecting each other's vulnerable points. It was beautiful in a deadly way, like watching a school of predatory fish move as one creature. The Hive swarm noticed them. A cluster of 30 bioships broke off from the main battle and accelerated toward the squadron. They moved fast, much faster than Jake expected. Within minutes, they were in weapons range. "Incoming EMP attack," the tactical officer announced. Multiple frequencies detected. Jake's hands tightened on the console he was watching. This was it. His modifications would either work or they wouldn't. On the display, he could see the electromagnetic pulses hitting the squadron's shields, pulsing through multiple frequencies, just like he'd predicted. The ship's power systems flickered but held steady. The frequency dampeners he'd installed were doing their job, preventing the bioelectric interference from finding a resonance point. Shields stayed up. Weapons stayed online. All systems functioning normally. Came reports from each ship. No power disruptions. 8. Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Master Reth, who was stationed in the engineering bay with him, nodded with satisfaction. "Your analysis was correct. Being right is good," Jake replied. "Let's make sure it stays that way." The battle began in earnest. Dragnari ships fired their main weapons, beams of concentrated energy that could slice through Hive bioships like knives through flesh. But the Hive adapted quickly. Their ships split apart, forming smaller units that were harder to target. They attacked from multiple angles, forcing the Dragnari to divide their fire. Jake monitored every system, watching for problems. The modifications were holding, but combat was unpredictable. A dozen things could still go wrong. He stayed focused, ready to respond to any crisis. Then came the first real problem. One of the squadron ships, the Storm Runner, took heavy fire from 3 Hive vessels simultaneously. Its shields held, but the power consumption was enormous. Jake watched the energy readings climb toward dangerous levels. He activated the communication channel to Storm Runner's engineering station. "This is Jake Morrison. Your power draw is approaching critical. Redirect auxiliary power from your secondary weapons to the shield generators. Do it now." There was a moment of hesitation. Then, redirecting power, as instructed. The energy readings stabilized. Storm Runner's shields held against the continued assault, giving the ship time to maneuver to a better position. Jake made a note to modify the automatic power distribution systems later. They should have made that adjustment themselves. The battle continued for hours. The Hive kept sending more ships, wave after wave. The Draknari squadron fought with skill and coordination, but they were outnumbered. Jake watched ships take damage, saw warriors die when a lucky hit penetrated armor. The tactical display showed friendly vessels marked in red, indicating critical damage. "We need to change the situation." Vexa's voice came through. "The Hive command vessel is at the center of their formation. If we destroy it, their coordination will collapse. The command vessel is protected by over 50 ships." One of her commanders replied, "We cannot reach it without taking catastrophic losses." Jake studied the tactical display. The commander was right. The Hive had positioned their command vessel perfectly, surrounded by layers of defending ships. Any direct assault would be suicide. But there had to be another way. He pulled up detailed scans of the Hive formation, looking for patterns. The defending ships moved in response to threats, creating a dynamic shield around the command vessel. But their movement wasn't random. They followed specific patterns, probably programmed instincts. Jake saw it. A gap in their coordination. A brief moment when ships were transitioning between defensive positions. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it repeated every 47 seconds like clockwork. If someone could time it perfectly, they could punch through the defensive layer. He opened a direct channel to the command deck. "Queen Vexa, I think I found a way through their defenses. Explain quickly." Jake described the pattern he'd noticed, the timing of the gap. "It's risky. You'd need to commit several ships to the attack run, and the timing has to be perfect. But if you can get through, you'll have a clear shot at the command vessel." Silence on the channel. Jake could imagine Vexa analyzing his suggestion, weighing the risks. Finally, "All ships, prepare for assault pattern Delta. We will exploit a vulnerability in their formation. Jake Morrison will provide timing coordinates." Jake's stomach dropped. They were actually going to do it, and he was responsible for the timing. If he got it wrong, if his analysis was flawed, those ships would fly straight into a trap. Master Reth placed a hand on his shoulder. "Trust your analysis. Trust your skills. You have not been wrong yet." Jake pulled up the timing sequences, calculated exactly when each ship needed to move. He transmitted the coordinates to the squadron, then watched the tactical display as the ships positioned themselves. 30 seconds to attack window," he announced, his voice surprisingly steady. The Hive seemed to sense something was wrong. Their defensive formation tightened, ships moving closer together. But they couldn't change their fundamental patterns without losing coordination. 20 seconds. Jake watched the defending ships rotate, following their programmed instincts. The gap was forming, right where he'd predicted. 10 seconds. 5. Now. 6 Draknari ships, led by the Blade of Dawn, accelerated forward at maximum speed. They hit the gap in the Hive formation at exactly the right moment, punching through the defensive layer before the enemy ships could react. For 3 perfect seconds, they had a clear path to the command vessel. Vexa's flagship fired first, its main cannon striking the command vessel's central mass. The other ships followed, pouring fire into the target. The Hive command vessel tried to maneuver, but it was too large, too slow. Within seconds, it was crippled. 10 seconds later, it exploded in a brilliant flash. The effect on the Hive swarm was immediate and dramatic. The ships lost coordination, no longer moving as one unified force. They began attacking randomly, sometimes even hitting each other. The disciplined swarm became chaos. "All ships, press the attack," Vexa commanded. "End this now." The squadron fell on the disorganized Hive ships like predators on wounded prey. Without coordination, the bio ships were individually powerful, but strategically helpless. The battle turned into a cleanup operation, but Jake barely noticed the victory. He was focused on a new problem. One of the squadron ships, the Crimson Fang, was showing dangerous power fluctuations. The ship had taken damage during the assault run, and something was failing. He opened a channel to their engineering station. "Crimson Fang, This is Jake Morrison. I'm seeing cascade failures in your power system. What's your status? Leverses. Multiple hits to our port side, came the reply. The engineer's voice strained. We have breaches in 3 sections. Power couplings are damaged. We are attempting repairs. Jake pulled up the ship's schematics, analyzing the damage reports. The problem was worse than they realized. The damaged power couplings were creating feedback loops that would overload the main reactor within minutes. If that happened, the ship would explode. You need to shut down the main reactor immediately, Jake said. Switch to emergency power. If we shut down the main reactor during combat, we will be defenseless. If you don't shut it down, you'll be dead, Jake replied bluntly. Trust me. Shut it down now, then listen very carefully to what I tell you. He heard orders being given. Then the engineer came back. Main reactor is offline. We are on emergency power. What do we do? Jake talked them through it step by step. Isolate the damaged sections. Reroute power through secondary pathways. Bypass the failed couplings. Use emergency patches on the breaches. The engineer and his team worked fast, following Jake's instructions precisely. It took 20 minutes, but they got the ship stable. The main reactor came back online cleanly, power flowing through the repaired systems. Crimson Fang was wounded, but operational. We are functional, the engineer reported. Thank you, Jake Morrison. You saved this ship, and everyone on it. Jake slumped in his chair, exhausted. Master Reth brought him something to drink. A Draknari beverage that tasted terrible but helped with the shaking in his hands. The battle ended an hour later. The Hive forces were destroyed or retreating. The Draknari had held the supply line. The cost was high, several ships badly damaged and too many warriors dead. But they had won. Queen Vexa returned to the engineering bay, her armor scorched and dented but her eyes bright with triumph. We have achieved victory. Your modifications made the difference, Jake Morrison. Without them, the Hive would have disabled our ships in the first minutes of combat. I just did what needed doing, Jake replied. You did far more, Vexa said. You identified a vulnerability none of our strategists saw. You found a path through an impossible defense. You saved Crimson Fang when their own engineers thought the ship was lost. You fought this battle as surely as any warrior, using knowledge as your weapon. Jake looked around the engineering bay at the Draknari craftsmen who had worked beside him throughout the battle. They were watching him with expressions he now recognized as respect. The kind of respect that had to be earned. I wasn't alone, Jake said. Everyone here contributed. Master Reth coordinated damage control teams. The other craftsmen implemented repairs under combat conditions. This was a team effort. Spoken like a true warrior, Vexa said. You understand that victory belongs to all who fight for it. The squadron returned to Drachna Prime 3 days later. Jake expected to go back to his normal routine, back to the workshop and the steady rhythm of repair work. Instead, he found himself summoned to the High Council chambers. The elderly High Chancellor who had cast the deciding vote at Jake's trial stood at the center of the chamber. Jake Morrison. The High Council has reviewed the battle reports from Keswick's system. Your contributions were significant and measurable. You have proven yourself valuable to the Draknari Empire. Jake waited, unsure what was coming next. We hereby grant you the rank of Master Craftsman, with full authority over equipment design and modification across Queen Vexa's forces. Additionally, you are authorized to train Draknari engineers in human methods, creating a hybrid approach that combines our respective strengths. I'm honored, Jake said. But I have one request. The Chancellor raised his hand. Speak. I want to train not just Draknari. Jake said. I want to train anyone willing to learn. If humans and Draknari can work together, maybe other species can too. Good engineering doesn't care about species or culture. It only cares about what works. The chamber was silent. Then Vexa stepped forward. I support this request. The human has proven that cooperation creates strength. Let us extend that lesson beyond ourselves. The Chancellor considered for a long moment, then nodded. Approved. Let it be known that Jake Morrison's workshop is open to any species willing to learn and contribute. As Jake left the chamber, Captain Sarah fell into step beside him. You have changed things here. Not just equipment, but how we think. That is a rare gift. I just showed people that different doesn't mean wrong, Jake replied. Sometimes, the best solution comes from combining approaches nobody thought would work together. They walked through the complex together, past training halls and armories, past warriors who nodded to Jake with respect. He had come here as a prisoner, accused of crimes he didn't understand. Now he was a master craftsman, teaching dragon warriors about human ingenuity. 6 months later, Jake's workshop was the busiest facility in the military complex. Draknari craftsmen worked alongside a handful of human engineers that Jake had requested from Earth. Together, they created hybrid technologies that outperformed anything either species could produce alone. The workshop became known throughout the Empire as a place where innovation flourished, where old problems found new solutions. Vexa's armor hung on the wall of the main workshop, not as a trophy but as a symbol. The piece of equipment that had brought Jake here, that had changed his life, and changed how two species saw each other. Warriors came to see it, to understand that something broken could be made whole, that something good could be made better. Jake stood in his workshop one evening, watching his students work. Draknari and human engineers collaborated on a new shield design, arguing good-naturedly about the best approach. Master Reth supervised, occasionally offering advice, but mostly letting them figure things out themselves. Captain Sarah approached, now wearing armor that Jake had completely redesigned to accommodate her old injury. She moved without pain, fought without limitation. You are thinking deep thoughts, she observed. Just realizing how far we've come, Jake said. A year ago, I was alone, on a forgotten station, hiding from my past. Now I'm here, teaching warriors, building things that matter. It's strange how life works out. You were never hiding, Sarah said. You were waiting for something worth doing, someone worth doing it for. You found both here. Vexa entered the workshop, as she often did in the evenings. She examined the current projects, asked technical questions, challenged assumptions. She had become more than just Jake's commanding officer. She was a colleague, maybe even a friend. The High Council has approved expansion of this program, she announced. 5 more workshops will be established across the Empire, all following the model you created here. You will oversee them all. Wenteen reading gather. When the parter, Wenteen reading gather. When the parter Wenteen reading gather. When the parter Wenteen cast, on 17. When the parter Wenteen. That's a lot of responsibility, Jake said. You have earned it, Vexa replied. But more than that, you have shown you can handle it. You take broken things and make them whole. Not just equipment. You do the same for people, for relationships between species, for ideas about how things should work. That is a rare talent. Jake thought about the armor he'd repaired that first night, not knowing where it would lead. He thought about the warriors who trusted him, the students who learned from him, the life he'd built here. He'd come to this place by accident, by a series of chances and choices he never planned. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the best solutions came from unexpected combinations, from mixing things that shouldn't work but somehow did. Dragon warriors and human mechanics, ancient traditions and new innovations, rigid procedures and flexible thinking. I'm going to need more coffee, Jake said. And probably bigger workshops. And definitely more tools. But yes, I can do this. Vexa smiled, that predator's smile that no longer seemed threatening. I never doubted it. From the moment you repaired my armor, I knew you were someone special. Not because you were human, not because your methods were different, because you cared enough to do the job right, to make something better than it had been. That quality transcends species. Later that night, after everyone else had left, Jake stood alone in the workshop. On the wall, Vexa's armor gleamed in the low light. He walked over and placed his hand on it, feeling the warmth of the metal, remembering the 3 sleepless nights he'd spent bringing it back to life. "Who repaired my armor?" Vexa had roared that day, angry and fierce. A lone human mechanic had answered, not with apologies or excuses, but with confidence in his work. That answer had led here, to this moment, to this life. Jake smiled. Sometimes the best repairs weren't about fixing what was broken. Sometimes they were about building something new from unexpected pieces. Dragon warriors and human mechanics working together, creating something neither could achieve alone. That was worth traveling across the galaxy for. That was worth leaving his old life behind. That was worth every challenge, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt. He turned off the workshop lights and headed to his quarters. Tomorrow would bring new problems to solve, new things to fix, new students to teach. He looked forward to all of it. The mechanic who had hidden on a forgotten station was gone. In his place was Jake Morrison, master craftsman of the Dragnari Empire, teacher of warriors, bridge between species. He'd found his place in the universe, and it fit perfectly. The armor on the wall seemed to glow softly in the darkness, a reminder that sometimes the most important repairs were the ones that changed everything.